Right. Thanking God for the beauty in simplicity. Let's call Joel chapter 1 Waves. Understanding that in reading Joel, structurally and even in terms of the points he's making, it doesn't seem to be a whole lot different than the prophets that we have already studied, even though Joel is going to seem to go back in time to the days of Elijah, the days when Jehoshaphat was king, around the time of Ahab. And so going back in time, we're going to see some very familiar themes, but the concept of waves is going to me, connect with the way that a lot of biblical themes go in cycles. And Joel is going to seem to prophesy during a time when the times are still good, similar to the way that we saw Isaiah prophesy during a day when the times were still good. And likewise, Jeremiah had a hard time persuading the people of Judah because the times were still good, but they were soon going to turn. And thus it seems that Joel is possibly on the first end of a cycle in Israel's history and quite possibly world history, where it is difficult to get nations in the midst of prosperity to turn from a course that's leading towards destruction. With that, though, I want to summarize chapter 1, not so much from the perspective of sequence, but I guess events. Understanding that the waves are going to seem to describe the way in which the locusts are going to overtake the fields of Israel in verse 4. What the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten. Skipping to verse 6, talking about another type of destruction that coming in the form of a nation rising up against the people of Israel. He's going to go on to talk about the net effect in verse 10 being the fields, or the fields being destroyed. Skipping down to verse 16, if there's any doubt, he's saying, is not the food cut off? And in verse 19, the fire has also added to the burden on the fields, that whatever the locust didn't eat, it seems that fire has consumed. And so the consumption seems complete. Understanding that it's going so far to even affect the animals, meaning they don't have food or water, and it's going to describe the cattle as being puzzled. But some of the response that God is calling for in this chapter, you can see in verse 5, where he's going to say, awake, O drunkards, or awake you drunkards, and weep, because whatever wine you've got isn't going to be lasting long. So the time is now to make a turn to possibly preserve the good times, even if you have to enjoy them at a slower pace. Verse 8 saying, lament like a virgin wearing sackcloth for the bridegroom of her youth. Likewise, verse 11 is calling them to be ashamed, specifically the tillers of the soil, because just as we are able to find joy in our work, especially when we produce something good, we get a sense of shame, and we are in a period where we might be failing, and whether or not it is their fault, they're going to be tilling fields that are going to be producing a shameful return or a shameful crop. It's going to call the priests to put on sackcloth and lament, and basically to fast in a season where they can, because soon they're not going to have a choice. Understanding that verse 14 is going to seem to connect with verse 12 of chapter 2, where he is going to say, call on the Lord at a time when he might be found, because even now he might turn from the impending destruction. And understanding that verb tense is one of the confusing things in Joel chapter 1, unless one of the things that describes God for us as the one who calls things that haven't happened yet as though they already exist. Joel is seeming to describe these things as though they have already happened. But one of the things that would be tough to do is call a fast in a situation where there's no food in the first place. That's just starvation. And so it sounds like, even though he may be speaking in the present tense, it may be speaking in the present tense of the certainty of what is to come, still calling them to repent, understanding that they probably won't. Understanding all of that, though, the thing that this chapter might have reminded me most of is the way that life's suffering seems to be increased when it comes in waves. That's our title. Of all the ways that God could have promised to destroy the land during the days of Joel, he brought it in waves of locusts, followed by a wave of invaders, followed by either a literal or a metaphorical fire to clean the rest of the land. With each new wave, whatever hope that might have been left is peeled or eaten or burned away until quite possibly a sense of hopelessness might set in. Not necessarily all that different from the way in which Satan was allowed to torment Job in waves that eventually even seemed to produce a sense of hopelessness in Job, a man who God commended, causing me to wonder if wave after wave of misfortune could cause Job to feel hopeless. What hope do the rest of us have? And the short answer may be quite simply in listening, understanding that Job was a special case, and because he was commended, God allowed Satan to test Job in a situation where Job wouldn't get a whole lot of answers. However, the nation of Israel during the days of Joel and the prophets was getting answers that they were simply ignoring. Thus, their wave after wave after wave of suffering was completely avoidable. And so the tragedy in the days of Joel may help us understand why God commended Job, because the answer in the days of Joel seems to be the same as the answer in the days of Job. The only difference is Job didn't have to be told to seek God. And since life is filled with plenty of unavoidable suffering, my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that God willing, we not compound life's unavoidable suffering with the avoidable suffering of overlooking answers He's already given.